and serious financial recoveries in place. What does it say about this country, this government, that they can find millions of pounds for royal yachts and oil subsidies for the industry, but not enough money for toddlers to be able to carry on at their local nursery? Now, it should be simple, but nursery funding is complex, with no consistency or fairness from area to area, and no certainty for early years providers and parents to make plans. Our maintained nursery schools work in the most deprived areas with a high proportion of SEND kids and provide a top quality service to our vulnerable communities. What will happen if they can't continue? As a secondary school teacher myself, during the pandemic, when our schools were closed to a large number of children, it was brought home to government, the media and politicians that our schools are not just places of education, but our teachers are social workers. We're advisors, we're at the heart of our communities. And the same has to be said for our unmaintained nursery schools and early years providers. The entire sector were left out of the COVID cost funding by government, and further inaction on long-term funding is leading to the crisis that we're all hearing about this evening. And not just an education crisis, but a social, a health, a housing, a crisis of a generation of young people. Now, I've stood with you and other Green Party campaigners at rallies before outside Downing Street to get support for special educational needs and disabilities. I've spoken at a rally outside Downing Street in support of play, not test for 4-year-olds and to keep our early years unique. I've spoken in Westminster alongside Jeremy Corbyn and Sadiq Khan's campaign to stop school cuts and fund schools fairly. And I hope to again be all with you in London in the autumn to demand a sustainable long-term settlement for our maintained nurseries and early years, and to exercise our hard-fought right to protest for everything we value the most. Finally, we know how fond Boris Johnson and Jacob Rees-Mogg are at jumping on a football jingoistic bandwagon. Well, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Sunak, we're telling you this evening that it is coming home, to your home, to Downing Street, because we know where you live. We pledge to support our kids and our communities and get thousands of these letters signed and bring them to your home in the autumn, because early years matter. And if you don't fully appreciate that now, you soon will. Thank you, everybody, so much for coming this evening and supporting this campaign.
Thank you very much, Vix. And, you know, even if we just take from the first few words of Vix, lifelong learning, and we know the best start in life for lifelong learning is good maintained nurseries and early years education. So thank you very much, Vix. Before I bring in the next speaker, I just need to give an apology from Jack Dromey MP. We already heard him mentioned from Judy this evening when she spoke about how she'd been working with him and others since 2015. Jack is the Labour MP and chair of the all-party parliamentary nursery schools and nursery reception classes group. And I had the privilege of attending that this week. And I have to say, there were 15, 16 speakers all saying the same thing. But when we spoke from the chat, we wanted to say to those all-party parliamentary group members, it's enough time for talk. We now need to take some action. And one of the really interesting things on there was the fact that we heard about the Birmingham May 2019 research project and the 7 Yorkshire and Lanarkshire schools who now are not, there are no longer 7, there are now 3. And the research that was done on those that shows that actually maintained nursery schools make a difference to a child's start in life. And so I think those are the messages we need to get out. The research is there, the heartfelt knowledge is there. So we need to make sure that we are getting those messages across, which I think we're doing this evening. So without further ado, the next speaker this evening is Daisy Cooper. Daisy is the Liberal Democrat MP and education spokesperson. So welcome this evening, Daisy. Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Amanda, and thanks ever so much for having me. I'm so pleased to see you've got 115 people on this call, and I was really pleased to get the invite because it's just so important we get this campaign up and running again. You know what, the hashtag says it all, doesn't it? You know, this is about funding children's futures. And there is literally nothing more important and nothing more precious than doing precisely that, especially after the last 15 months that we've had, 15 really precious months in the lives of some very small children, 15 months which they not really going to get back. And asking for a long-term settlement is just such a no-brainer. If you look at the value of maintained nurseries, and all of you know this, you know, you're working primarily in deprived areas, you provide more special educational needs support on average, staff have higher qualifications. It is a tick, tick, tick scenario where it's absolute non-brainer to provide that long-term settlement, and you're providing such amazing value for money. I think I said at a previous rally that as a party, Liberal Democrats take this so seriously. In our manifesto for the 2019 general election, I think investment in early years was our largest spending commitment that we made, because we recognise just how important that investment is. If you invest in children in those early years, then of course it's going to carry them through for the rest of their lives. So I was really shocked to see the statistics that the NEU provided about, I think almost half of maintained nurseries are now running a deficit, and of a whopping 75,000. I mean, that's really real kind of critical territory. Really genuinely shocked to see those figures. And so I want to say thank you to all of you who are working in this sector. Thank you for everything you've done, particularly throughout the pandemic. I know that there were times when maintained nurseries and other early year providers were not getting the clarity or the information about whether they should be open or closed, or how to fund various things. And many of us, including me, were trying to get that information for you by repeatedly asking the same questions over and over again. But clearly, if we as a country want you to thrive, and I certainly do, and so does my party, then we have to get a long-term settlement and decent funding into the system. So I'm fully behind you and fully support the letter. And so long as we can overcome the protest crackdown bill and whatever COVID situation might appear in the autumn, I really hope to see many of you and hear lots of noise, and hear you making a hell of a racket in Downing Street in the autumn. So thanks ever so much for having me, and and keep it up. Let's make sure we keep making lots of noise and get that long-term settlement that we really need to invest and guarantee our children's futures. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you, Daisy. And I agree, the NEU research was shocking, but actually probably isn't shocking if you're working in that sector. Everyone is well aware of the cuts and the things that are going on, and the restructures and the changes in staffing that they've had to make. And but when you see it in stark written word, it is very shocking. And I think that's things that we have to be highlighting when we're arguing for decent funding. It's not even asking for extra, we're asking for decent funding to allow our settings to be operating in the best that we can. Our next speaker this evening is Sally Lease. Sally is a head teacher at Castle Vale Nursery School in Birmingham. Thank you, Sally, and welcome this evening. Someone unlock Sally? Mike, can you let me know if we've got Sally on the line? If not, I'll move on to the next. We'll come back to Sally, and we'll move on to, I don't think she probably needs very much introduction, because if you are involved in this sector, you would have absolutely come across Beatrice and the fantastic work that she is doing as the Chief Executive of Early Education. So Beatrix Merrick, please welcome to this evening.
Thank you very much, Amanda. And I'm going to follow up what people have said by saying a little bit more about that research that we did with NEU, NAHT in unison, and also some more facts and figures, because I think the speakers we've heard so far have talked about the real experience with families, but it's sometimes helpful to focus on figures in terms of influencing politicians. And also, people have said to us, we really need to know what the situation is. Well, the situation is that we have 3 maintained nursery schools which are due to close this year, where the consultation process has gone through and those closures are confirmed. And that's Head and Lahole Nursery School in Sunderland, St Mary's Community Nursery School in Chester, and Harry Roberts Nursery School in Tower Hamlets in London. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. Back in 1986, there were nearly 600 maintained nursery schools in England. They've closed at an average rate of over 5 a year since then. So this is not just a short-term problem. This is a really long-term trend. By September, we will only have 385, and many of those are in a huge state of financial insecurity. So the DfE's own figures about deficits show that whereas in 2009-10, 3.5% of nursery schools had a deficit. By 2019-20, that had risen to 20.8%. And the combined deficit just in that final year between 2018-19 and 19-20 rose from 6.7 million to over 8.8 million that year. So this is an increasing trend and a serious trend. And that was before the pandemic hit. Our research earlier that year found, and that people have quoted this already, that as many as 46% were in deficit by March 2021 as a result of the additional costs and the loss of income resulting from COVID-19. So I know government thinks that we've been saying for years, oh, we're on the brink of closure, we're on the brink of closure. And this figures show that actually nursery schools have been on the brink of closure and have been closing for 35 years. But we are now in a completely, sorry to use that word that's been so overused, unprecedented situation. The idea that nearly half of our nursery schools are in deficit. Now, admittedly, some of those are only just in deficit, but some have deficits of tens or hundreds of thousands of pounds. That has an impact. That puts so many schools in danger of closure. But even where it doesn't, even tonight, I've just seen a message from a head teacher saying, I can't be on the call tonight because I'm in the governor's meeting agreeing redundancies. This is real, this is happening now. We did a survey just last month to find out, because people were starting to tell us, we know we've always been the place of last resort for children with SEND who no other schools or nurseries will take. But we just can't do it anymore. We're down to minimum ratios. We haven't got the capacity. And that was absolutely borne out in the survey findings. So because high needs funding is getting harder to obtain, over 40% said that that was getting harder to get. Staff cuts are affecting more than a third of schools and at their ability to take children. And cuts by local authorities to some of the reserved places and specialist provision is also taking away those guaranteed places which children with SEND so desperately need. So only just over a quarter of schools said that they were still able to take children with SEND on the same basis as previous years. The rest were either uncertain or were saying they were definitely going to have to cut back the number of children, the number of hours they could attend, the amount of support they could provide. It affects quality, not just for the children with SEND, but for all children. It affects staff who are operating way above. And we know maintain nursery schools staff go above and beyond all the time, but they are really being pushed beyond what I think is sustainable due to these cuts, due to that community, that commitment to the community and to providing what children need. So if government is serious about post-pandemic recovery and the levelling up agenda, it needs to invest in early years, and especially in the most disadvantaged children and the providers who support them, including maintained nursery schools. Today, some of you may have seen there was a cross-party manifesto launched by the CSJ and the Fabians. So we can treat this as a non-political non-partisan issue, and we absolutely need to. We've got to take early years policy out of this partisan system and get all parties to agree to invest in a long-term stable infrastructure for our children's future, and especially in maintained nursery schools.
Thank you so much, Beatrice, and thank you. Your research provides us the backdrop to the reality that we face every day in our settings, and it's really good to feel we know what it's like, but it's good to see that the research and the education research that you do backs that up. So thank you very much on behalf of all of us working in the sector. I am now going to bring in Sally. Thank you, Sally, for joining us. Sally Lease is a head teacher at Castle Vale Nursery School in Birmingham. Welcome, Sally, this evening. Can you unlock Sally, please? Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Yes, Sally Lee's from Castle Vale in Birmingham. And if some of you have attended these things before, you're probably thinking, not her again. And I'm thinking exactly the same. I often say, I really don't think anybody wants to hear anything else from me. What else have I got to say? And they said, yes, no, please do. And that made me realise quite how long we've been fighting the exact same campaign. Jack Dromey, who's been spoken about quite a bit tonight and is such a supporter of this, happens to be the MP for my nursery school. And I raised the issue when the single funding formula came out about the detrimental effect this would be to nursery schools, probably 5-6 years ago. And he promised me 6 months of campaigning. He says, I'm a very busy man, I'm really passionate about this, 6 months. And I don't think either of us knew we'd still be working on this exact same campaign this long after. Just think what other campaigns we could have done in that time. He's really supportive, but it's ridiculous that we're still arguing the same thing, extension after extension. And one thing this pandemic has shown, and my primary and secondary colleagues get it, is how important the early years are and how concerned they are about the children that have missed out. One primary colleague said, they don't call it the foundation stage for nothing. And this is a sector-wide issue, not just a maintained nursery school issue. We need to stand together because our colleagues get it, we get it, and I'm not sure our government gets it. They seem to think that children arrive at 5 and that's where they need to put their funding. And we need to campaign and carry on this campaign. Yes, get the maintained nursery school supplementary funding going, but we also need to make them realise that children do not arrive at 5. We need to secure the maintained nursery school funding adequately and for the long term, and then hold those schools to account to help the early years sector and improve the early years sector as a whole, because the whole sector has been woefully underfunded. And every sector, every part of the sector is trying to do their best for children. But at the moment, that's all they can do is their best in a scenario that isn't ideal. So we need to fund the maintained nursery schools. We need to use the maintained nursery schools. But these children don't arrive at 5. They've been somewhere. And so we need to adequately fund 2, 3 and 4-year-olds across the board so everybody can do their best for them. And then on that, which has already been mentioned previously, but is so important, is children with SEND do not arrive at 5. However, the support funding, finance and specialist services most often do, or don't, because there isn't any space for them, as has been mentioned. They need to be supported pre-5 because they don't arrive at 5. The government's agenda, because let's get this right now. It's a shame, but let's use the devastating effect these last 18 months have had on our youngest children to show where this government's priorities need to be. And that is not throwing money constantly at school-age children because they don't arrive at 5. But if we get it right and put that money, that support, that focus into early years, when they do arrive at 5, they'll have had the foundations for life and learning that they need. So I will be supporting this campaign. Hopefully, well, I will be marching on Downing Street with my placard and making this government realise that there are a lot of children out there because they don't arrive at 5. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sally. And just one comment to make on what you've said, because it's always inspiring. Never, ever apologise for your passion. It is not your place to be apologising. It is the Treasury. Without further ado, I'm going to move on to our next speaker, which is John McDonnell MP. Welcome, John, this evening, and thank you for joining us on behalf of the Labour Party. Someone can unlock John, that would be lovely. Thanks, you.
Amanda. Thanks, Amanda. Look, can I just briefly explain why this period up until October and the demonstration in October is absolutely critical? What happens in government is that you have budgets, but then you have a comprehensive spending review. So this autumn, Rishi Sunak, the Chancellor, along with the whole of the Cabinet, will be undertaking their spending review, and they'll be making the decisions about expenditure, well, for the rest of this administration. So this is the key decision-making time. So it's absolutely critical that we influence that agenda. We've got a window of opportunity that we've got to seize. Now, for me, look, I represent a multicultural working class community in West London. I chaired the early years partnership in my community for about 5 years. I worked with all the different settings. I've got a fantastic maintained nursery school in Macmillan Nursery, Early Excellence Centre, and it's just wonderful. And it is moving what people have said tonight, but Macmillan for me it's the foundation for the community. It deals with a whole range of issues. The children, of course, but also the families drawn in. It's an incredible asset. And yes, they are more expensive because we employ fully qualified staff. That's what our children need, especially when we're dealing with SEND children as well. So this is absolutely key to me. Now, what I'd like people to do, Amanda, if possible, is we've got to build for this demonstration in October. The government told us when we were campaigning on this 4 years ago, they told us they recognise the importance of maintained nurseries. Then 2 years ago, when we all lobbied, they told us they'd give us a long-term financial settlement. That's what we need. We're just saying to them, we've won the argument with you, we know. Now just deliver the promise you gave us. And this isn't party political, just deliver what you promised us. That's all we're asking for. So I'm asking people, what would be really helpful is if after this session, if you could contact your local MP and just say, this is so important to us, so important to our community, can you join us in October when we go along to try and urge the Chancellor and the Prime Minister to just deliver on their promise. And in that way, you know, I think we could secure an enormous victory that will lay the foundations for the long-term future for this sector. So thanks for asking me to speak. It's just been moving listening to people, but we've got to be really determined now. And so that focus on October is absolutely key. Solidarity.
Brilliant. Thank you, John. And thanks for those very wise words. And we know that you will be on this campaign trail with us all of the way. Our last speaker this evening is Emma Stapley. She is a maintained nursery school teacher and the National Education Union rep at Oliver Thomas Nursery School in Newham. Welcome, Emma, this evening.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Excellent. Yeah, so like you say, my name's Emma and I have been working in a nursery school for 3 years. I only qualified 3 years ago, so I kind of feel like I'm in my early years compared to everyone else who's spoken tonight. But I just kind of wanted to talk a little bit about why I chose a maintained nursery school to start my education as a teacher and what I've learned since in that short time. So the reason I chose a maintained nursery school is because they are without doubt leading experts in their field. The teachers that I've had the privileges to learn from have taught me some of the most valuable life lessons I've ever seen. And they are solely focused on early years. There's no top-down pressure from the year 6 like funding and the SATs and stuff that we have to adhere to because we're not part of a school. All of our training is dedicated to helping the children that we work with. And I just thought that was the area I wanted to be because I want to be an early years specialist. So the picture at my current nursery school is we have 3 rooms for the 3 to 4 year olds and 1 room for the 2-year-old provision. We work with 3 qualified teachers that are directly linked to the children. Then we also have a Senko who's a qualified teacher and currently 2 co-heads. We're also really lucky because we have a trainee teacher with us this year and she's had some fantastic lessons working with us and she's seen some great development. Our school characteristics, our pupil characteristics are built up. We have 1/4 of our children have special educational needs, 80% of our children have EAL, and many of our children come in under the early years pupil premium. So what does that mean for me? That means it's a big responsibility that I wasn't fully sure that I knew what I was going into. Like I said, I started out, I'm originally from Devon. My outlook in Devon was very different from what many of the children are seeing here. And the reason I picked Newham to work was because I wanted those challenges. And yes, it has been challenging. We, as like a school, have worked in some incredibly tough situations over this past year, as I know everybody else has. And it's only going to get tougher because of the budgets and the shortages that we are facing. So I'm really lucky, like I say, to work with highly skilled, highly trained staff. The lady who was speaking before me said arrive at 5. We know the pinch point of that more than most, I think, because we understand that they definitely don't arrive at 5, like she said. We work with a lot of SEND children who are on waiting lists to get on waiting lists, basically, to be seen and diagnosed and have the support and funding that they need. So what that means in the meantime is we have to pick up all the slack. We have to be specialised SEND teachers as well as early year teachers so that they can get the best start in life. And it's something that I just never thought I'd have to deal with in this kind of way. So in my class, I have 10 children with special educational needs, but there are only 3 adults in the class. Initially, we had 4, but due to budget constraints over the past few years, we've had staff leave and we haven't been able to afford to replace them. This has not only a knock-on effect on the SEND children who aren't quite getting the input that we'd love to offer, but also the other children, because SEND children do take up more of staff times. And so other children are also missing out too. It also means less resourcing. Just the stuff we need, which should be standard in a classroom, is getting harder and harder to obtain because we're running out of money to buy it. And I think one of the main things that I've noticed is the level of support we offer, not just the children, but their families. I didn't realise quite how, like someone said, I'd need to be a social worker in this role as well as a early years educator. So I have helped families with domestic violence. I've helped families who don't have enough money. Our school had to buy in loads of food during the pandemic, and we spent a whole evening splitting it up and distributing it. And the teachers had to say a list of who has the greater need, because we can't afford to give it to all of our children. But most of them need it. And that's the worrying, shocking fact, is that without us, these children will go hungry. They'll lose out on education, and one of the worst things is they will be hit hardest with safeguarding. And I think this is the real main thing that worries me about the loss of maintained nursery schools, is how much danger, physical danger, that puts our children in. I know that, like I say, I've worked with a lot of children with safeguarding needs, so I've had a lot of disclosures in my short 3 years, and I know that I've had the best support with my team, who are highly qualified in dealing with this, to support me, to support them. We're very lucky to be partnered with a children's centre. So we work closely with social workers and family support officers. Without that, our families and children would be in far worse states than they're already currently in. And I just know that without us there, it's only going to get worse. And I'm not saying that other schools and other nurseries aren't doing the same level. They are, but we're just the centre of excellence, as all maintained nurseries are. We are the ones that the borough comes to when they need the support, when they have families who need us. We help train and monitor all the PVIs in our area, and our children's centre monitor all the childminders in our area. So we're not just looked on for the children and the families that are with us, we're looked on to support hundreds of families. And I just think that this is the time to push for the campaign. We have been shown this year, especially over January to March, how important we are. We got told we could not shut because the country would not function without us. And I think it's now time we turn around and demand what is ours. And I know we've been fighting for a long time, but this is now, we have the higher upper hand to do this. And I think it is the best chance we have of getting the funding that we so rightly deserve, and the families so rightly deserve, to make sure that everybody gets the best start in life.
Thank you, Emma. Thank you, Emma. And you started off by saying you felt lucky to be working in this environment. And actually, we feel very lucky to have staff like you working in our maintained nurseries and with our early years, and all of the other people that work in this profession. It isn't easy. And you've described some of the really difficulties that you are having that I know are echoed across the country. We've been asked this evening if we're recording because people have missed the start of it. Yes, we are, and it's available on Facebook and on YouTube. I want to firstly finish by saying thank you very much to our speakers this evening, all brilliant contributions. Thank you very much for the joint working of Unison, Early Education, NHT, NEU, our political parties and our community groups. But mainly thank you so much for all of you, for all you do and have done, despite the difficulties you face in giving the smallest people the very best start in life. Your day should absolutely not be spent juggling money, making staff cuts, but looking at innovative ways to develop and really bring our children's early education on to the best it can be. I said at the beginning, and I truly believe this, it is the toughest, but the best and most rewarding sector to work in. And it has our most talented workers in it. We've heard tonight heartbreaking stories, yet inspiring stories from everybody. And we've heard how the research backs up what we are seeing every single day. When you come to a rally, you should expect that there will be a call to arms. And so tonight, as we make this relaunch, we are going to go out with a bang, and we are going to continue into the autumn term. So we're going to ask you a number of things to do, because we do need, as John McDonnell said, to hold this government to account, to make them deliver the promises that they made. So invite your MPs and councillors, your mayors into your settings, publicise this on social media. All of these people are elected and all of them are serving our communities. So publicise it, write letters to your local newspaper, send photos in, and really make it so that these MPs and councillors and people that are working in the political sphere that can begin to put pressure on government can see what a difference your setting makes. Get parents and local groups involved, and again, publicise that. Collectively, sign our letter to the Chancellor and ensure that maintained nursery schools and early year settings are not left out in the comprehensive spending review. Really put pressure on that. Spread that far and wide. Family, friends, colleagues, into the local schools that you feed into your clusters, into your secondary schools, and into your sixth forms. I know particularly the sixth forms are the other bookends. I always see it as the bookend, and these are the least funded in all of the sector. You have the early years provision and the sixth form provision, and so get them on board, because everyone in education knows the best start in life is given at the early education. And do attend in person our march in autumn on Downing Street, so that we can really highlight and put pressure and hold the government to account to deliver on the promises they haven't just made this year, but in years to come. It is time now to say enough is enough. We are funding the best. You need to fund the best start in life for all of our young people, because otherwise, what cost is ignorance? I want to say thank you very much for all of you, and good evening.